Good morning, guys. I know you're here. At least I see the early birds. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a new week, and thanks for coming in. My mind is heavy. There's a lot sitting very heavy on my mind. None heavier than the kids with the terrorists. When something is brought home for you, when something you've been hearing about in distant land, it was okay. So in like the last 6, 7, 8 years, we've had to be careful about traveling on the highways. It's become increasingly dangerous to travel between cities in the southwest, which is where I largely travel by road. And as it got worse and worse, I gave up my farms in Ijebu because of the dangers that began to lurk in the forests. We heard of persons who were kidnapped as they were traveling between Ibadan and Ijebu, particularly when they used the old roads. So increasingly, we reduced the places we will travel to. Yoruba towns and villages, especially in the frontiers, became more and more depopulated. Ekiti, the Igbomino parts, the Okun Yorubas of Kogi. It was the boundary areas of Bomosho, which is essentially where Orire is. That's pretty close to home. And now they've been gone for weeks. And the government is impotent to do anything about it. And His Excellency, the governor, is explaining how he is not the excellent protector of his people, explaining away the impotence of what is meant to be a component unit of the federation. That was in the week. But in the case of these children, it's now in the weeks that was, and we cannot afford to simply accept these and move on until the next incident. And the government, make no mistake about it, would actually prefer that we moved on. There are so many others that they've moved on from. Too many others, if the truth be told. But that was, anyway, the children are still in captivity, as are the teachers. In the week that was, we were told they rescued General Abubakar Rabi's wife. Well, I wonder how come nobody saw any evidence of the other persons who were in captivity, shown to be in captivity with both the murdered general. Make no mistake about it, regardless of the stupid excuses of the government, of the Katsina state government, particularly advertising the impotence of that government. The reality is that the man was killed, because if he was in his own home, having access to whatever level of medical care he could buy as a major general, retired, he would not have been dead. But hey, somebody should stop lying to the people. If you've paid ransom for the wife, own up to it. Further advertise your impotence so that we all know the gravity of the situation we're dealing with. In the week that was, news came into the public space of a gentleman now deceased, Balasani Kawo. He was said to have paid the bandits, terrorists, 500 million plus. They still killed him. In that same week, I came across Hakim Baba Ahmed's interview explaining how they paid, I think about 175 or so for his cousin, or his nephew. All whilst he was a special assistant in the presidency, a special advisor in the presidency. In that same week, that was VDM and the Rattle, I believe, organized some protest in Ibadan. Yeah, thanks, Odubia. 175 million was paid, yeah, by Hakim Baba Ahmed to terrorists who held the guy for 36 days or so. He was in the presidency. Do you need me to tell you again about my friend whose kidnappers called whilst I was on this live program last year in November? They collected 50 million. He was within a forest. The DSS and all the paramilitary were busy perambulating the place. Reality is, he paid 50 million. That was the same gang that kidnapped the Chinese, the one that was later traced to the Seriki Fulani in Ijebu. The reality is that we'll come to this later on so that we do not waste too much time in contemplation of this multiple madness. But never forget, when we talk about these things, it's not to titillate, it's to open a window so that you see. You know, when you lift the veil and you catch a glimpse of what is going on underneath the seamy, dirty, putrefied underbelly of the Nigerian state. In the week that was, the Rattles were attacked in Ibadan yet again by thugs, organized by state or state-sponsored elements. Sometimes the glorious name of NANS comes into this. NANS, the same NANS that we bequeathed when we left the university system, that fought a military dictatorship to a standstill. The same NANS is today hand in glove with a repressive regime, mortgaging the future of children yet unborn. When this country was under the jackboot, my generation fought that military. NANS was a major plank from where that oppression was fought. The same Nance is today singing on his mandate they have stood. Which brings me to something that is related. I have always had a lot of respect for Dangiwa Umar, the Colonel Umar. I've always had a lot of respect for him, but my respect for him soared. He wrote a letter to Tinubu, the sort of letter that although of the self-serving variety that Obasanjo would ordinarily write. You may not like Obasanjo, but he did write some very important letters. I don't like him, but he wrote some important letters. But this time around, it was Umar, Colonel Umar, that wrote this letter. And I read through it, and I was impressed. I was impressed because the man understood the moment. The man made clear that he was grateful for the remembrance of those who had fought for June 12, particularly members of the armed forces who were remembered in Bala Blue's June 12 address. But he went further to list what he expected as a dividend of that democracy. He did that. This is something that a lot of people got carried away and ignored to address whilst they were busy back clapping themselves that they were remembered by Tinubu in his Democracy Day address. The question they all forgot to ask, unlike Dangiwa, is the fact that, is this really a democracy? Are we really in a democracy? Forget the fixation on names. Are Nigerians freer today than we were when we were fighting Abacha? Is the Nigerian more secure today than we were during the military era? Is life really better for the Nigerian today than when we were fighting Abacha? Is Nigeria less corrupt? These are critical questions that we must ask of ourselves, even as we are invited to celebrate democracy. In the week that was, we were asked to celebrate an empty, hollow, backwards ritual. And before the week was over, the vacuousness of what we are celebrating as democracy was brought home for everybody to see. In Ekiti, just yesterday, they had a hollow ritual. Yeah, completely hollow ritual. And they called it a democracy. People like myself found nothing to be disappointed about. Chief Bola Ige said in his lifetime, said, "Blessed are those who do not hope, for they shall not be disappointed." I am a man who is full of hope, but I do not place my hope in non-existent structures, such as INEC. INEC was held to have been complicit in the mess that was referred to as election in Ekiti yesterday. Multiple stories of voters' cards, uncollected voters' card, being shared to people so that they will get paid to go and vote. Multiple incidents of violence against voters. I have no dog in your fight. I'm merely calling what I have seen. Credible reports showing clearly that those of you who are expecting to have an election in 2027, you really need to come off the delusion and understand that your first opponent in that coming election is INEC. And if you're a politician expecting to partake in the coming elections and you are silent about the obvious partisanship and complicity and compromise of this INEC chairman and the major officials of INEC, then you're all just jokers. Jokers. That's what you are, because how do you expect a corrupt process to produce anything beneficial to the people? The more estranged the people become from the political process, the more okpebolos the system will produce, the more Sanwo-Olus the system will produce, the more persons who are not accountable to the people, such as the simpleton in Rivers, similarly, you will produce more and more of those, because a captured political process will produce persons manufactured by godfathers. They will rule for the benefit of the feudal lords, and it will not be for the benefit of the people, because sovereignty will no longer reside in the people, which is our current situation. It will reside in persons who have captured the institutions of state. This is where we are. And this is the reality that we must begin to contemplate. So, in a lighter mood, I've been noticing a funny exchange going on in Lagos State. One of the many surrogates of the Alaafin of Bodilon, heading one of their agencies. I'm told this gentleman has a horse, or had a horse erected in front of the building. And then the Omekos, the Lagos Aborigines, the ones who are usually completely asleep when it comes to issues that should excite them, began to bellyache about the horses. So the horseman was promptly picketed, governor was involved, the beaded crowns in Lagos State were involved, and the guy was, I'm told, ordered to remove his horse. And they were all back clapping themselves and congratulating themselves. And I looked at them and I began to laugh. And this is where I think we should all find some mirth. Because you have to catch your fun where you find it in these hard times. So now that they have removed this statue of a horse, are the drains in Lagos State going to start flowing better now? Will the refuse on the streets disappear now? Will the lawlessness that permeates every part of our daily life be curbed? Will food become cheaper in the market now? At least now they've removed the horse. Would security improve? Now they've removed the horse. Yorùbá will say wọ́n fẹ̀tẹ̀ sílẹ̀ wọ́n pàlàpàlàpà. They have left the leprosy unattended. It is festering, but they are chasing the cure for ringworm. That was in the week that was. I'm sorry, I see I overran the week that was by a minute. So, for those of you who are joining us, that was the week that was. Welcome to a brand new week, and good morning to those who are just coming in. This is the part where we begin our, I call it a sermon for the week. But whilst that was in the lighter mood, it behoves me to begin this in less than lighter mood because there are two items of housekeeping that I must dispense with very quickly. The first is the purpose, because in the absence of an understanding of purpose, abuse becomes inevitable. I do this for a purpose, and it's a dual purpose, and I believe that it is critical that we understood this purpose clearly, because in the absence of that understanding, abuse becomes inevitable, and it is important for both of us. The first is this. I have always believed that if you find a problem with a situation, if you are incapable of tolerating that situation, if you do not find the grace to live with that situation, it is almost always because you are either a part of the solution or you are the solution. For the last 41 years of my life, I was 16 when I first became conscious of this. I have found myself completely dissatisfied with the situation of my country, the objective realities of Nigeria. So I bellyached. Oh, I bellyached. I argued, I studied, I quarreled, I participated, sought to bring changes. And over time, I've come to realize that I am cursed with an incapacity to ignore the many problems of Nigeria. So I speak. I used to write a lot, but because you guys don't really read, even when you are given the books for free, I am forced to speak. So I speak. I speak because it's easier for you to listen, to watch. New media has allowed me the luxury of having 208 of you right now. At least we're talking to each other. By the end of the week, at least 8,000 of you would have watched this, and I know a few more will watch it on other platforms. So it's become important for us to speak like this because I know that the things I have to say to you, because they are the truth, they are immortal. And for as long as those problems persist, the things I have to say to you will remain relevant. So it will remain relevant as contemporary exhortations, but even more importantly, long after I'm gone, and most of you who are watching me today might be gone, they might be the touch by which a future generation will find their way to sanity, because what we have built and what we are sustaining is certainly insane. So that is the purpose of what I do. I'm not here to create content for your titillation. So some of the things I would have to say would offend a lot of you, and I'm very happy to offend you. The truth is an offense. It's not a sin. With time, I guarantee you, with time, even the things I say that sounds insane, time will catch up with the truth of those things. That's why when I post things 10 years old, 8, 7, 8, 9, 7, going back years, when I post the things I've said in the public space, they seem like they were said yesterday. No, it wasn't prophetic, it was simply the truth. Truth is immortal. With time, it's a lot of what I have to say will catch up with you. So that is, it serves a dual purpose. It is more important for me to say the things I say than for you to hear me, because I'm convinced that a future generation will certainly hear me if you fail to hear. That is as far as that is concerned. The second item of housekeeping, I need all of you to please keep in mind that there is nothing about what we're doing that will be of consequence if we merely talked without acting. I am convinced that if we can build a moral majority, not necessarily a majority of Nigerians, but a critical mass of persons who understand the issue, if enough of us understand the issue, we build a critical mass, we may be able to move the needle. It may not be in this generation, it may very well be that we sow the seed that sparks another generation to take themselves to liberation, because ours is not a pro-democracy struggle. It is critical that we all understand this. So please take the time, break down some of these things, ask questions of yourselves, join the platform. I shared the link last week. We're building on it. Ini has assured me that we are moving to Telegram so that we can start discussing issues in a more concerted fashion, and as many of us as possible come together to deal with these things. What we also expect is that there will be programs around which we may coalesce, so that when we're talking about restructuring, for instance, you would have clarity as to exactly what it means in relation to the critical mass that we're building. When we're talking about security, you have clarity as to exactly what we mean. If we're talking about education, whatever it is we're discussing, because my intention is to build a critical mass of people who understand clearly where we are headed. It will take time. I'm also figuring out a whole lot of things as we're going on. You would help me. I would help you. We would help ourselves. There are no Voltrons anywhere. It will take all of us. But there is a purpose to this. It's not about titillating ourselves. It's about building a critical mass of persons who uses their brain even as they rebel against a system that is manifestly designed to destroy them. So now we deal with today's topic. It's the Nigerian factor. I'm sure you've heard it said all your life. You get to a place advertised to have a program starting for 10 o'clock, such as this one, and then you find that it doesn't start until 12 o'clock. You sat there, but it just didn't start. And when you would engage somebody you think should know, they will summarize the entirety of the insanity you were lamenting. Say it's the Nigerian time, or they say it's the Nigerian factor. So you applied for an international passport. And when you applied for the international passport, they even told you it's going to take 2 weeks. There's a portal all designed for it. First thing first, you get to the portal and you find the frustration of network that is so slow that it's not even compatible with the website or the portal. You labor at it, and then you wake up at odd hours and crazy hours of the day, but the infrastructure does not support the vision, or rather the intention. There is a disconnect. Now you have to go there physically. You know the story. It does not bear repetition. And when you ask, they tell you, it's the Nigerian factor. Every time there is a dysfunction in the system and you complain, it's the Nigerian factor. Every time something is slated to start at 10, it starts at 11, it's the Nigerian factor. Every time they ask you, who do you know? Because you needed to get something done somewhere and you get asked, who do you know? It's the Nigerian factor. Every time I had occasion to have this with you, and then you heard the alarm going off that NEPA has brought light. Uniquely Nigerian grammar. NEPA has brought light. They have brought light. Before the Nigerian child is up to 3 years old, he or she already understands exactly what it means when they say up NEPA, or sometimes off NEPA, or NEPA has brought light. We've normalized insanity because it's the Nigerian factor. Yeah. When religious obligation demands that you do something that is completely against common sense, and it is done and it explains your insanity to the next person eloquently, is the Nigerian factor. All kind of weird adaptations because we're in Nigeria, is the Nigerian factor. Have you noticed that airports all over the world, there's usually a corner exclusively reserved for travelers to Nigeria so that they may repackage their products inside the bags? You have an entire section. It's just you because we are traveling to Nigeria. They already presume, they plan with us in mind. I've seen it at Heathrow, seen it at Gatwick. It's always there in a corner for the Nigerian. The Nigerian factor means that let me not even begin to go into the detail of that just yet. But understand this. Weird adaptations and extreme trauma has led to the existence of what we just generally label resourcefulness. We are resilient. Yorubas will say, "Ìyà ti mọ́ wọn lára." Suffering has become second nature. Because of the Nigerian factor, we've developed the Nigerian spirit. We're not feeling what we You cure insanity with insanity. In response to the Nigerian factor, we have developed and evolved the Nigerian spirit. Madness cures madness. But when you speak to the Nigerian factor, I think it is critical to understand very quickly that what we are speaking to are the many things that happens in Nigeria that you do not find happening in other places. They are unique to Nigeria, but something battered this. Something battered this because in order to fight a problem, you must understand the root of the problem. This is where I usually bring the analogy of you standing in front of the mango tree and demanding oranges. You need to cut the tree to get the orange. That mango tree has to go. So, how did we end up with these things that we have lightly labeled the Nigerian factor? The Nigerian factor. Let's be clear about something. What is called the Nigerian factor is essentially impunity. That is what happens in a place governed, because this is the dangerous thing. Usually, countries are governed by law. Even totalitarian states are governed by law. North Korea, deemed totalitarian, is governed by law. Each person knows exactly what they may or may not do, and they know exactly what the consequences would be when they do those things that they are not meant to do. So, because as repressive as you may deem the laws in those places to be, the law rules, persons knows their rights and obligations in those places. But when you have a dangerous place such as Nigeria, which is necessarily governed by impunity, what you find very quickly is that you develop what we now label Nigerian factor. Because how do you govern a place with impunity? When a place has the colonial legacy that Nigeria has, where the state is alien to the people, and the state is alien because the colonial edifice that undergirded Nigeria was rooted in fraudulence. And that same fraudulence that battered the Nigerian entity has been passed to the Nigerian state. It is a fraud. Let's break it down. How do you have an alien state? An alien state is the state that is divorced from the will of the governed. When a state exists in spite of the will of the governed, an alien state evolves. The Nigerian state as a colonial contraption was an alien state. It was not responsible to the governed, it was responsible to the British and the shareholders of that enterprise. And the shareholders were not the Nigerian people themselves. And with the formation of the Nigerian state and its flag independence, a new set of owners have begun to administer the alien state, and the Nigerian state, to varying degrees, has been an alien state since 1966. The will of the people it governs has not been involved in the governance of the people, and because it could not allow the will of the people to rule, you had what you found in 1993 with June 12. You found what we found again in 2023 with Bulaba. The will of the people is not involved in the governance of the alien state, and that alien state that has refused to allow the people's vote to count has occasioned a situation where, because you cannot hold the state accountable for its many shortcomings and failings, you find yourself powerless. So you find workarounds. These workarounds are what feeds the alien state and its sustenance, and what has created what me and you are calling the Nigerian factor. When I say Nigeria is governed by impunity, a lot of people look at me like I'm an extremist, but this is actually very easy to see. Just yesterday, you had an election in Ekiti State. In that state, there are credible, in that what they call the election, there are credible allegations of vote buying, of INEC's collusion with the APC to hand out uncollected PVCs to mercenary voters, persons who voted in multiple times, violence everywhere, and yet a governor will be sworn in. Now, whether that governor performs or not is not going to be the basis for his continuation or the continuation of the APC in governance. It will be a function of who controls the levers of making sure that the next governor emerges. The will of the people is of minimal importance in the transition of power to persons in government. So when you have these, when you have a police that knows that it cannot enforce the laws evenly, it can only enforce the law against persons who are not politically connected or who are unable to purchase justice. It creates conditions such as the one we refer to as the Nigerian factor. You also have to understand that the way and manner of the collapse of the First Republic equally fed into this, because people saw very quickly that the law does not matter, might mattered. Let's agree without concession that there was a basis for the second coup of July 1966. Let's agree that there was a genuine grievance without conceding the argument, but let's even just agree for argument's sake. When Ironsi was killed, there were at least two senior officers of Southern extraction, but the insistence was that he had to be Gowon because he was of Northern extraction. This very quickly communicated to every person that hold it, merit does not matter in the republic we are building. One. Two, the tribe or ethnicity rates above other consideration because the argument was in the open space. Someone like Muritala Muhammad was the one that would prefer to have become the head of state, but because he was a Muslim, and in order to preserve northern solidarity, the most senior northern officer, who happened to be a northern minority person of middle belt extraction, was promoted ahead of the other southerners. These are subtle things, but they lie at the foundation of the Nigerian state. He was 6 years old at the time. Yet it was institutionalizing clearly a preference for nepotism above merit, a preference for ethnicity above merit. The foundation of the state made clear that tribalism triumphs merit, and the trauma of the war that resulted after this showed very clearly, glaringly, that merit counted for nothing. What mattered above all else was who you were, who you knew, the way the civil service was destroyed in the immediate aftermath of that same civil war, the way seniority was lost on account of the civil war and persons were demoted so that they might be reabsorbed, the way persons who are undeserving were promoted in spite of the absence of merit, these all destroyed the basis of a rule-based society. In the midst of all of this, you had the oil boom, which became the oil doom. Institutions became decayed, and orders were had to be summarily obeyed, destroying processes and institutionalizing impunity. Impunity became the basis for the governance of a country that had been destroyed because merit was sacrificed for expediency, for ethnicity, for religiosity. The Nigerian factor evolved. That military interregnum did more than anything else to destroy our cultural values. More than anything else, the rise of materialism goes back. It became a point where merit was sacrificed. Money became more important than character. During Babangida's era, you could go to bed a pauper, wake up a baron, simply because persons had connections in high places. What do we say about, look, this Nigerian factor has its root in the reign of impunity in the place of the rule of law. When you think back to the Shagari years, to how persons with just the stroke of pen became billionaires, to how persons were destroyed, economies were destroyed, similarly by the stroke of a pen. When who you knew became more important than what you knew, this spilled over into the years of the first coming of Buhari and Idi, where 60 something suitcases, or was it 53 suitcases, or whatever, came into the country in spite of a general ban on the importation or on travel, or even the importation of currency notes. This double standard that is found on might is right, which is another word for impunity, that has seeped through everything This is the basis for what you find today and we refer to as the Nigerian factor. When you heard Cameron talk about how Nigeria is fantastically corrupt, it wasn't enough to call us corrupt because corruption is not a Nigerian invention. It's actually more of a British invention than a Nigerian invention. I've spoken in the past to how we do not have a Yoruba word for corruption. None. There is no Yoruba word for corruption, and I stand to be corrected. You may describe something related to, you may describe a corrupt practice, but there was no word for corruption. You may talk of Ogbariba, collected a bribe. You may talk about, uh, you may talk, the process has to be corrupted. The entire process has to be corrupted before you can describe what we call corruption in Nigeria. What we actually label corruption in Nigeria is impunity. So when he was talking about us being fantastically corrupt, it was his way of describing what he has seen, where the entire judicial processes, the legislative processes, everything appears to be completely impotent in dealing with the multiple nefarious stealing that he was privileged to be able to see from his vantage point as the prime minister. A country who could not prosecute Ibori that outsourced the prosecution of Ibori to them. Ibori could only have gone to prison in Britain. There was no way he was going to go to prison in a place like Nigeria. The same people have now graduated to the point where the man could see that we were irredeemable, we were lost completely to these practices, and he could not see anything within our own system that appeared to be fighting anything called corruption. So it was fantastically corrupt. We can only be fantastically corrupt in a place like Nigeria where the law does not rule. Where even when the law pretends to rule, it only rules to condemn the poor, but it protects the evil. I see the question by just reason. What about dear Zani? What about dear Zani? How is it in the interest of the British to help you catch a thief when they've seen what happens when they've caught thieves for you in the past? Every kobo that was collected and from Ibori and given to the Nigerian government, who did he end up back with? Publicly, he went back to Ibori. So the point is, if me and you require the British to tell us that Diezani is a saint, that's on us. That's on us. The same British just helped to enrich Bulaba and Shagori. They gave you a loan to buy steel from them. So please, anyway, that was in the lighter mode. That's how I would treat that. But suffice to say that when you have a society that has been built around lies, that's the Nigerian factor. Abacha, for instance, I was reading narratives in recent times saying that Abacha merely stashed all those monies abroad because of the sanctions against Nigeria, normalizing the evil that was. It's only in Nigeria that you hear such explanations offered by persons who pretend to have use of their brain. Look, here is the reality of our existence. When you turn around and you say, okay, let's find a workaround for these problems, one of the first things they'll tell you is automation. That if you have an architectural automation of your governance systems, then you would have dealt with these problems. And that is where they brought in the kind of automated control you have in passport, in the passport office with driver's license, port clearances. But what has happened? In reality, you have workaround to automated systems that allowed Larry, weakest bulldog, to be able to have access to INEX server. So capturing all this data, centralizing it, automating it has not meant accountability because who is watching the watchers? Ultimately, It has only made it easier for those who have captured the Nigerian state to manage the state that they have captured. The Nigerian factor continues in passport issuance in each and every one of in look at what has happened with INEC, BVAS, IREV, all the things that work in every other places will not work in Nigeria because of the Nigerian factor. There must always be a workaround to allow the administrators of the system to retain the capacity and discretion to place their hand on the scale. That is the Nigerian factor, a refusal to allow the rules to apply, the law to rule. Look at EFCC and financial reporting. The EFCC has the capacity to trace almost every dime that is transferred using the banking system in Nigeria. But the same EFCC is incapable of tracing bandits, terrorists who are sharing money on TikTok. Why? Because the state is complicit. That is why. The state is complicit. If the state is not complicit, what has blinded the EFCC to the terrorists sharing money on social media? When did it become impossible for the DSS to find terrorists who are on media? That is the Nigerian factor right there. The Nigerian factor has meant that the Nigerian state, which is complicit in the insecurity ravaging Nigeria, has become impotent. It is not for a want of capacity, it is for a want of desire. The government is not interested in fighting its comrade at arms. I remember Bayo Ononuga telling all of us very clearly that the government can speak with the terrorists anytime they want to speak with them and that they do speak with them. I remember Gumi telling everybody that the government knows who the terrorists are. And I remember multiple members of the armed forces explaining to us that the terrorists are their brothers and sisters. So the Nigerian factor continues to militate against the capacity to fight the evil because the state itself is complicit in the evil. When the law enforcement is equal, then you will find equality in results. But what you have today is that the laws are treated as mere suggestions because enforcement is selective. So persons believe, well, the law may apply to those ones, it does not apply to me. And that is why it has begun to look as though there is an ethnic coloration to criminality. Evans the kidnapper is in prison. Rightly so. But where is Datijo, the kidnapper, pardoned, being rehabilitated? Where is Nnamdi Kanu? In prison, convicted, rightly or wrongly, incitement to terrorism. How many terrorists are daily released by the Nigerian state? Over 700 were released just last week by the Borno state government. Terrorists. These are persons who have borne harms against the state. What about Nnamdi? Why is he there? Nigerian factor. That's what it is. When are we going to tell ourselves that truth? The Nigerian factor has assured that similar crimes are treated dissimilarly. When you are committing your crime, it is critical that you watch the name you bear and what part of the country you come from. The Nigerian factor. If you're going to ever change anything because it is not sufficient, that we lament, solutions must also be offered. The first thing that must happen is that the law must rule. In the absence of the rule of law, the Nigerian factor is sustained and it will persist. It will not end. it will multiply and the problems will fester. And Nigeria will someday implode because the human spirit reflexively rejects injustice. And you cannot sustain this Nigerian factor on the system that has battered it without injustice proliferating. The second thing that must happen is that the judiciary must be truly independent. What we have today is an excuse for a judiciary. There are persons within that judiciary who still speak up for justice, some of them paying great prices. They're in the judiciary. So it's not as if everybody, delivery to me is the saint, everybody are sinners. I'm as much of a sinner as anyone else. And I acknowledge that there are very brave men and women on the bench, but they are very, very few. And it's been made clear to almost all of them that they are an endangered species on that bench because the system is very, very unapologetic about its own evil intentions. And they have become the reality on the bench. There must be rigid protection for whistleblowers. Have you noticed that since after the whistle blew in Ikoyi, the one that landed the man who is now your ambassador in France, whistle stopped blowing because it's not that the whistleblower thing does not work, it's that the law does not work because there is no political will. It's a cascade of reasons multiplied by the Nigerian factors that have assured that this is not happening. A living wage must be paid. A living wage must be paid. You cannot be paying a man under 100,000, give him a gun, give him the authority of the state in a poverty-stricken space such as this one, and imagine that you are not licensing a thief. But because it suits the purpose of the Nigerian state as it is currently structured and governed, to keep the police poor, to keep them hungry, so that they may be bent to the will of their political overlords. They are kept poor. So a living wage must be paid to those who work in public service so that they might not have the legitimacy of poverty standing behind them when they explain the reason for their corruption. There must be a cultural and value reorientation. As a people, we have given ourselves over to base instincts. And this is very easily understandable. When purpose is unknown, abuse becomes inevitable. The Nigerian has not been directed to any useful purpose for multiple generations. We've only existed as carnal beings, focused substantially on self-titillation, enjoyment, and nothing more. No overarching ambition as a people, not directed to any lofty goal or purpose, nothing. So in the absence of purpose, perversion has become commonplace and normalized in our society. And nurture, above all else, determines the outcome. You have over 20 million children roaming streets. What do you expect to bat in the future? All you'll get in the future are ready recruits for the drug lords, for the bandits, for the terrorists, for the kidnappers, for armed robbers, for cultists. The person to whom you have offered no purpose, directed to no use, is inevitably going to become a mercenary in the hand of whatever vice grips them. That is where we are. We have to promote collective interest over and above the personal. If we don't fix it, it injures all of us. All of us will be injured. The Nigerian factor is one that needs to be killed. We need to address this failing that we have disguised as a factor. Let me share a story with you. I'd shared it in the past. I was in Britain some years ago, and I ran into a story. I believe it was all over their papers, and if you bother to Google it, you'll find it. A man who had retired as a brigadier general was recalled from retirement by the British Army, and he was court-martialed for corrupt practice. He was convicted by the court martial, and he was stripped of his ranks and sent to prison. But what did he do? He claimed child education benefits to which he was not entitled, to the tune of about £50,000. And on account of this, he was stripped of his rank, sent to prison, and ordered to pay back the money. In recent times, the man formerly known, I think, as Prince Williams, who is now Mr. Mountbatten, was stripped of his princehood. A novel practice by the British that I believe had only ever happened once before them. What they were doing, both with the Brigadier General and with the Prince, is that they were laying the foundation for the argument that nobody is above the state. They were making clear that everybody will be accountable under the law. They were shoring up the foundation of their state, because in the absence of the rule of law, a state is destroyed. Yorubas will say, "Ìlú tí ò sófin, ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ ò sí ńbẹ̀." When you translate that, it is saying that a town without laws has no crime. But that would not be the true translation or interpretation of that proverb. The Yorubas are incapable of envisaging a place that is devoid of laws. So they were not talking about the absence of laws. They were talking about the absence of the rule of law. They were talking about places governed by impunity. Nigeria is one of such. It is the absence of criminality to those who are covered by the powers of impunity, so they may steal as they care. Yaya Bello being a case in point. Rufai, El Rufai, the short one, being another case in point. It took El Rufai losing the powers of impunity to put him in prison and to ensure that he can never meet his bail condition for as long as Tinubu desires that he remains in prison. Yeye Bello is walking around because he still retains the cover of the powers of impunity. Remember what Oshiomhole told you. Come to us and your sins are forgiven. I guess the converse is leave us and your sins are remembered. That is the Nigerian factor right there. The capacity to deploy impunity and deploy impunity in governance of a state. That is the Nigerian factor. But there is the Nigerian spirit, which must never be confused with the Nigerian factor. The Nigerian spirit is the one that says, I can do all things, even when the state has failed me. I can do. That I can do spirit is why when you look at the World Cup today, you'll find a team of Nigerians playing for foreign teams, and you'll still be able to name a substitute bench and have a world beater. That is the Nigerian spirit. The Nigerian spirit is the one that crosses the Sahara, crosses the Mediterranean in escape from this madness. That is the Nigerian spirit. The Nigerian spirit is the one that stands up everywhere, anywhere in the world, and they know immediately that that nigger is a Nigerian. You don't monkey with him. That is the Nigerian spirit, the indomitable spirit that has walked and survived the madness of the country that we have built. But if that Nigerian spirit does not kill the Nigerian factor, the Nigerian state will die. as it is currently dying from 1,000 cuts made by all of us as we solidify the Nigerian factor. The multiple ways and manner in which we have helped to erect this country that is built on impunity, it will not be saved until the Nigerian spirit overcomes the Nigerian factor. During the course of the week, particularly on Monday or Tuesday, I will post further links to the website and to the Instagram channel that we are putting together, and then we'll find a way to uh, ensure that we begin the interactions, I should say, that are required if we must come out of this mess. We need to educate ourselves very quickly, organize ourselves, because we have to confront this system. The Nigerian spirit must be awakened to confront the Nigerian factor, because without doing so, the Nigerian state will die, and a lot of us will equally die with it. I don't want that. But we are not irredeemable. This brings me to the end of this week. But I need you to keep the children in mind, not just the ones in Obomosho, but all the ones in captivity everywhere around Nigeria. And whatever else you do or do not do, continue to demand the removal of Amukito if you are truly interested in the coming election. If that man remains the INEC chairman, forget about any election. The election is already lost. Even if Tinubu does not want to rig, Amukito will rig for him. Have you a lovely week. God bless you. I'll be posting across all social media channels. That's for your room. Take care of yourselves, everyone. Have a lovely week ahead. Bye bye.